Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. I'm Bad as Fish 80, and today we're going to be looking at and finding out about a Minion Master's keyword. Now, with the upcoming expansion Torment that is based all around the Voidborn faction, I thought it would make sense if we check out one of the Voidborn keywords, and that is Voidborne Wound. Now, keywords are important to know because it tells you exactly how specific cards work and how to get the best out of them. So we're going to check that out. We're going to find out exactly how the Voidborne Wound works. We're going to have a look at the cards that benefit from it and what their benefit is. Then we're going to have a look at a deck built around this keyword, and then we're going to check out some gameplay. So let's dive in and find out all about the Voidborne Wound. Okay, Voidborne Wound. So this is a keyword that is only found on Voidborne cards. Remember, the keywords in the game, if you look at a card, they'll show up in orange. You'll be able to mouse over them and find out more about them. And what you'll find if you mouse over Voidborne Wound is you'll get this little tooltip. So what does it tell us? Okay, so Voidborne Wound. If a Voidborne minion deals damage to enemy master while this card is in your hand. So seems a little confusing on its own, but let's dig a little deeper. So basically there's two parts of this. You've got the trigger, the Voidborne Wound trigger, and then you've got the benefit that it gives you. So a card that has Voidborne Wound, whilst it's in your hand, it can be triggered. And the trigger here is a Voidborne minion doing damage to the enemy face. And when it's triggered, it will show up in your hand as yellow, and then it will be available with the benefit that the Voidborne Wound gives it. So let's have a look at the cards that benefit from it, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. And then we'll have a look at exactly how it works in gameplay. So as you can see here, we've got a number of different cards that benefit from it, all Voidborne cards, of course. Voidborne being one of the factions in the game. So let's have a look here. We'll talk a specific example here with the Boomer. So a Boomer is a 2-mana card, but it has a Voidborne Wound ability. So if this is in your hand and another Voidborne minion does damage to the enemy's face, that will trigger Voidborne Wound. And the benefit that the Voidborne Wound on the Boomer is it will give you a reduced cost. So you'll get this for 1 mana. So just to go over that again, you've got the Boomer in your hand. You can trigger it by hitting the face with another Voidborne minion, and then when you use it, it will have the additional bonus. Now when the Voidborne Wound is triggered, you'll see that the card will highlight up in yellow, and if it does have a cost reduction, because the Voidborne Wound can be different, the benefit it gives you, and we'll see on some of the other examples in a minute, the Voidborne Wound benefit can be different. If it's a cost reduction, you'll have a little icon on the card, but that's not always there because it's not always a cost reduction. So let's have a look at some of the other cards. So one of the slightly different cards is the Illusory Dragon Whelp. So again, it has the Voidborne Wound, but this time, instead of giving you a mana reduction, it gives you a benefit of summoning 2 more. So in its default state, you get 1 Illusory Dragon Whelp, and if you triggered it and then use it, you summon 2 more. So remember, to trigger it, it has to be in your hand, not just in your deck, it has to be in your hand. So that's one of the 4 cards, not the 5th card, that's the next card. One of the 4 active cards in your hand. Okay, so let's go through and have a look at the other cards that have this. So we've got Voidborne Wound here on the Nether Step. This is to reduce the mana cost by 1. We've got the same on the Gorex Gate here, reduce mana cost by 1. One thing to mention here is Voidborne Wound has been used in the past by the developers as a way of balancing these cards. So for example, the Gorex Gate, you might think it's a little bit weak at 4 mana, but it's too strong at 3 mana. Let's give it a Voidborne Wound so it can sometimes be at 3 mana if you've triggered it. Next up we have the Flightless Dragons. Again, reduce mana cost by 1. Following them, the Morgrul's Rages. Now this is a card that I've definitely had a number of people be quite confused about exactly how this works. So what happens with the Morgrul's Rages is, again, to trigger it, the Voidborne Wound, and once it's triggered, when you use it, all friendly minions on the field will gain rage. So if you use it when they're not triggered from the wound, you won't get anything rage. You've got to trigger it from the wound and then spawn it, and then it will rage anything that's out there on the field at that particular time. Okay, and the final card that we have benefiting from the Voidborne Wound is the Dragon Pack. And the Dragon Pack again simply has to reduce the mana cost by 1. So you can see here that most of these cards, the Wound reduces the mana cost by 1, but there are some variants in there. We got the Illusory Dragon Whelp, as we looked at, that gives you the extra ones. We've got the Morgul's Rages, etc. So hopefully that makes sense as exactly how the Wound works. So you've got the trigger in a bit, which is whilst you've got the card in your hand with the Wound mechanic, you do damage to face with a Voidborn minion, and then when you use the triggered card, you get the benefit. But how can we get the best out of it? Well, let's have a look at a deck here that's built all around this mechanic. Now, this deck, I believe, was originally created by the mighty Deathshoot. So we've got Diona, just a very versatile, strong master. And then we've got a deck built of a lot of strong Voidborn cards. Not entirely Voidborn, but of course, what we've got is we've got a number of cards that have the Voidborne Wound mechanic. So we've got the Boomer, we've got the Illusory Dragon Whelp, we've got the Flightless Dragons. We've also got a number of other Voidborn cards. So the idea is we need those Voidborn cards to do damage to face to trigger the other cards that have the wound that are hopefully in our hand. And then we get the benefits from that, and we prosper. Now, you'll notice we have Azog in here. Now, Azog is very useful because he has his Shadow Dash ability, which means he can jump, which makes it a lot more possible to get to face. It's way more difficult for your opponent to stop it. Now, if you're playing against this sort of deck, one thing you've got to immediately notice is your opponent's playing this sort of strat, and you want to do your best to stop them getting to face. But Azog's going to make that very difficult. Now, one thing you need to be careful of, and this is definitely a trap that I fall into, is you know you want to do the Voidborne Wound. You know you want to get to face with a Voidborne card, but sometimes you just push that too much, especially with Azog. Every time you use his Shadow Dash, it's getting more expensive to use. So you don't want to do that over and over again, because you may trigger the wound, but it may have cost you too much to do so. So let's have a quick look at the cards that we've got in here. So we've got the Boomer, it's got the wound, so we can get that for 1 mana. We've got the crossbow dudes, cheap, anti-air, can grab bridges. Elite Swarmer, it's a little tanky guy, but importantly, it is a Voidborn minion, so it can trigger the wound for us. Frostfeather Flyby, it's just a cheap removal spell. We could try different removal spells. I've tried this also with the Arcane Barrage, a little bit more expensive, but has more removal power. We've got the Grenadier, of course, a real staple cheap card you'll find in a lot of decks, anti-horde. We've got the Illusory Dragon Whelp, which, as we've seen before, has the Voidborne Wound, so we can get a bunch of value out of that. Trigger that and get 3 of those. Now, of course, they are very weak, but they do damage, unlike they used to do no damage at all, apart from their explosion. So it does do damage, so if you can use it in a way that it doesn't take damage, then it can put out some decent DPS, especially when there's 3 of them. You can see there, 15 DPS, it's not great, but 3 of them, it starts really adding up. And of course, when they take damage, they will explode and give you that AoE clear as well. Then we've got the Swarmers, another cheap Voidborn minion, bridge grab, trying to get to face, trying to trigger that wound. Azog, as we mentioned earlier, with his Shadow Dash, can really help us get to face and put some pressure on. We've got the Flightless Dragons. Of course, they've got the Voidborne Wound, as we saw before, mana cost reduction. And we've got the Zealots of the Burning Fist. Some decent DPS, some tankiness that we don't have anywhere else in the deck. So, we've got some options there. Hopefully, the idea of the deck is strong. So, best case scenario, we have the Boomer, we have the Illusory Dragon Whelp, and we have the Flightless Dragons in our hand. We trigger the Voidborne Wound, hopefully organically, without having to spend too much mana with Azog, and then we get that benefit. But let's have a look at a bit of gameplay, and hopefully it will make exactly a bit more sense as to how this works. So, this was just a game I had on the solo ladder, checking this deck out. Okay, so we got Diona, as we saw, against Wrecked. wrecked one of the strongest 1v1 masters. Same with Diona. So the cards with the Voidborne Wound, we want to try to avoid using them until they're activated. We don't want to use them until they're activated. So the first thing we see here is we've got a lot of aggro. So we've identified that. He gets unfortunate here. Randomly plays his rammer at the bottom. He should be able to see the position of my bear traps. He should have been able to avoid that. Okay, so if we stop it there for a second, we can see that the boomer has been activated. We got to face, we did a bit of damage with the swarmer. The boomer was the only card in our hand with the Voidborne Wound mechanic. It's been activated. It's highlighted. It's down to 1 mana. That's a good start. Try to put some pressure on. So one thing we'll know straight away is he's playing a very aggro deck. Again, he plays his rammer at the top, but he fails to notice where the bear trap is. Big mistake. If you're playing this sort of strat, you've got to pay attention to where Diona's bear traps are. They will make a little visual indicator when they spawn. You've got to pay attention. Okay, so again, we just stop it for a second here. You can see we did a bit of face damage. We've got a couple of activated cards in our hand. We've got the Illusory Dragon Whelp, and we've got the Voidborne Wound activated Flightless Dragons. Now you'll notice the indicator's only on one of them. They're both highlighted, but the Voidborne Wound mana reduction is only on the Flightless Dragons, since we don't get a mana reduction on the Illusory Dragon Whelp. Okay, so I know he's playing aggro, so I need to defend. The good news is we've got Diona, we've got the traps that can really help us. Okay, so interestingly, he's playing Morgul Rages. You can see there they weren't activated in that time. But a big aggro push coming out here. It's important not to freak out in these situations. Just try to defend as well as you can. Try to minimize every part of damage as you can. Right, let's go again. So we triggered some damage to the face. We've got the Voidborne Wound stuff. We've got some activations ready to go. Now the flyby is going to be useful for taking out the Arcanist, since that's very powerful against a lot of our stuff. Looking at here, what it looks like is I think I've got the Blood Imps, maybe instead of the Grenadier. So maybe the deck's slightly different to how we set it up, but it's almost identical. So we've taken a lot of damage, but we've also done a lot of damage. So we've identified that he's playing a very aggro strat. We are very far ahead on XP, but it's not irrelevant, but it's not really how we're going to win this. We need to hold on and minimize as much damage as possible. Right, we've got a heal coming out here for Ruffles, but Ruffles is going to get taken out, unfortunately, by the explosion by Morgul. But we're trying to put enough pressure on here to take out as much damage coming in from that Scrat Launcher as possible. Okay, we've got an activation there. Ruffles dying, unfortunately. Rammer coming in again. Now our bear trap just disappeared there, so we're going to have to use our taunt trap to shut that down. Every hit point is very important here. We need to minimize damage as much as possible. We need to get heals as often as possible if we can from Ruffles. But the good news is we're able to put on a lot of pressure as well. Now we're not going to really win from getting to Mana Frenzy or anything like that in a game like this. It's just about trying to hold on. But the benefit, of course, of Perk 3 is we get a second trap to help us deal with this. Now Azog's great to try to put some pressure on, shut down this Scrat Launcher. Ruffles getting a heal in there, that's very important. Hugely important. Rammers, of course, he only has one Rammer, but he also has a Brutish Betrayer. Using our trap, our crossbow trap there is great because it can take a hit from the Rammer, stopping a hit on face. Very close. We're both under 1,000 HP, so it's getting really pretty serious here. Ruffles is only going to be dispatched for things on our side or on the bridge. Now I think I make a little mistake here. Ruffles dies, but it's not really a huge thing because it wasn't a health pot, which is really what we want. Okay, so we can see he's got the activated Morgul Rages there. Didn't really rage too much apart from themselves. But let's have a look. We're both doing face damage here. Rammer comes in, and it's really, really important to deal with these Rammer hits. But also we've got the Boomer. We need that Boomer to hit as many things as possible if we can, because that does 250 damage, I think. Really, really powerful. Okay, so we're dropping down with 441 HP. Ruffles coming out. It's going to get some mana. That's not exactly what we need. We're both under 300 HP. This is super close. We know he's got the Scrat Launcher. That's going to be a real problem for us to deal with. We are on a timer here, because with the Scrat Launcher, he can kind of guarantee some damage. Now, I'm trying to put my traps on face, but the traps are really helping here to tank the Scrat Launcher. Kind of kept us in the game there. We hit Mana Frenzy. We're down to 61 HP. This is very, very close, but he's down to 77 HP. Ruffles going for a heal. Remember, he won't be able to use his second Rammer, the Brutish Betrayer, with this low amount of HP. Ruffles comes in the cluster there, gets a heal. That's incredibly important to us. We've got Mana Frenzy. We just held on, and we have managed to get the victory. Okay, so that was quite the game. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the Voidborne Wound mechanic works, how it can benefit certain cards, and how you can build a deck around it. Let me know if you got any questions regarding how the mechanic works. And of course, with the upcoming Torment expansion, maybe we'll see some Voidborne Wound added to some current cards. Maybe we'll see some new cards with the mechanic. Of course, we've got a new keyword coming in Invoke. And if you haven't seen that, check out my previous video about the Torment expansion. Remember, we've got all the new Mayhems, lots of cool stuff. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe. And I'll see you again soon here in the Fish Tank. Take care.